my fellow Australians.
To the victors, the superlatives, a landslide, an historic victory for Anthony Albanese.
Serving as your Prime Minister is the greatest honour of my life.
And to the losers, it's a drubbing.
Now, we didn't do well enough during this campaign. That much is obvious tonight, and I accept full responsibility for that.
A car crash campaign that saw Liberal National Coalition leader Peter Dutton lose his seat. So, what was behind Labor's dramatic turnaround?
Albanese had incredible luck.
And Peter Dutton's downfall.
He really went hard on the campaign model of Trump, and I think people were really turned off by that.
We also talked to a leading independent on why they're stealing Conservative seats and hear an alternative political view.
Let's get off this beauty pageant cheering for the prettiest girl in the room sort of thing, and let's talk about the issues.
I think the Australian people have got the name.
Welcome to the NBR Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd. Polls closed at 6 o'clock on the Australian East Coast on Saturday night. By 8:30, just 2.5 hours later, pundits were calling it.
This could be a big win for Labor, but it's certainly a win.
At this time, Nine projects the election is won by Labor.
It ended up an emphatic victory for Labor, a complete turnaround from just a few months ago.
It was a bit of a surprise. All the polls were saying that Labor was likely to win, but the actual magnitude of the result was much greater than anybody had anticipated.
Lachlan Cahoon is the NBR's Aussie correspondent.
I think the polls in advance of the election, two-party preferred, were saying it was probably 52 Labor, 48 to the coalition. It ended up being 54 to Labor and about 46 to the coalition. But in terms of seats, there are still some seats to be decided. But as we speak now, Labor have got more than 80 seats in the House of Representatives, and the coalition barely have 40. So a landslide is probably a pretty apt word to use.
Right. What was it like watching it unfold?
Disappointing. As a political junkie, I wanted it to go to, it's like watching a game of football that is over by quarter time. You want it to last all night. But what I mean is disappointing is that I was hoping for a bit more drama. It was over before it had almost begun.
In your view, was it that Anthony Albanese got it so right, or that Peter Dutton got it so wrong?
I think the truth is sort of, as usual with these things, halfway in between. I think, look, what amazes me is that at the beginning of the year, incumbency was the curse. There was a huge reaction against incumbency in government because of the cost of living, because of inflation. 4 months later, incumbency is a virtue. For many reasons. I mean, Donald Trump is one reason, in the way that he's created turmoil in the world trade system, but also because inflation's coming down. The Reserve Bank is cutting interest rates, but largely because the world seems full of risk. And sticking with what seems to be the best thing. So a remarkable turnaround in 4 months. I mean, in 4 months, the coalition vote, based on where the polls were at the beginning of the year, the coalition vote collapsed 8%. In that time, which is astonishing. Okay, you asked me who got it right and wrong. I mean, Albanese had incredible luck. He wanted to call the election earlier, but there was a cyclone in Queensland. He had to postpone that. Then he had the situation in the United States with the Trump tariffs played to his advantage. We had Easter. We had the death of the Pope. There were all these disruptions that stopped the coalition from really getting any momentum going. Right. So Albanese was really lucky. There's the incumbency factor that I just mentioned. Yep. But also, the Dutton campaign was really lacklustre. They shot themselves in the foot on a number of occasions with contradictory announcements that they had to walk back. They were unprepared. They were raving on about the budget deficit, and then announced some tax cuts, which were going to put the budget in deficit for the next couple of years, even more than Labor's plans were. So they had. The coalition had a very confused message, and to me, it comes down to. The party seems to have taken a strategic decision to go for the outer suburban electorates and move more to the right. Whereas under our preferential voting system and under compulsory voting, the sweet spot for elections is in the centre. And they've kind of abandoned the inner city electorates that are now dominated by Teal's, the centrist Teals and Labor. So, there's this real soul searching that the Liberal Party needs to do, because they've lost their heartland and they haven't found a new one. And there's this big dialogue in the party as to whether they go back to the centre and small L Liberal values, or whether they move more to the hard right. And I think the election that we've just had shows that on this occasion, Australians weren't prepared to embrace that sort of more conservative right of centre view.
So the analysis and the introspection begins. Was it the Trump factor? Was it Liberal leader Peter Dutton, or Labor's actual campaign? How did Albanese turn it around?
When you look at the delivery of the Albanese budget, it's those public good areas: health, education, incomes, nothing about austerity, nothing about Trump, nothing about the sorts of other issues that perhaps were Dutton's go-to.
Jennifer Curtin is a politics professor at Auckland University and writes extensively on Australian politics. In terms of backlash against Trump and those kinds of ideologies, do you think that played a part in this election?
I do, but perhaps not just because of the tariffs. I think it's because Dutton was already kind of pretty good at populist right-styled rhetoric.
Yep.
But he ramped this up early in the campaign. He sort of went alongside Trump, talked about him as having gravitas on the world stage and things like this. And so he even had one of his own party members from Northern Territory wear a MAGA hat, make Australia great again.
Yep.
And talk about needing to create a ministry of efficiency, so replicating the Doge kind of model, and he wanted to cut public servants.
Yep.
So he really went hard on the campaign model of Trump, not just, and I think people were really turned off by that.
Right.
And Albanese cashed in the sense that he started talking about something we do already, which is independent foreign policy, but he started to talk more about, we have national pride, we have an independent way of doing things here in Australia, and he primed the electorate to sort of go anti-Dutton via anti-Trump by spruiking this sort of nationalistic fervour, but in an inclusive kind of way that was independent of America.
Sounds clever. That sounds clever.
I think so, but only at the end.
Only at the end, yeah. Because as you said, the polls were going the other way not that long ago. And then they did switch and were predicting maybe a very tight Labor majority or even a hung parliament. They didn't predict this, though, did they? How did the numbers actually fall in the end?
Yeah, no, they didn't. They didn't predict this really huge gap. I think a lot of people voted earlier, like we see here.
Yeah.
Those are people who've made up their minds, right? So I wonder if there's been some, longer, that they've taken a longer time to make up their mind. Those are the ones that Labor was able to secure towards the end of the campaign. I mean, the debates were really highly watched. They changed their format to a more American model, actually.
Yeah.
And the television stations got great viewership for the debates, and it was Albanese who really rocked the third debate of the last debate of the three. So that might have helped spruik that final result.
Yep.
One interesting policy, I think, for New Zealand is they really went after young voters. Albanese did, through this decision to cut student debt by 20%. And where we see those post-tertiary students or tertiary students are in those cities like Brisbane, like Sydney, like Melbourne, that, where Dutton lost his seat, like Brisbane, those areas where students don't see themselves being able to buy houses in the future. So they need some debt relief potentially, and that may have worked too.
You just mentioned something then, Dutton losing his seat. The first time that an opposition leader, this has happened to an opposition leader. It's quite incredible. So they're leaderless now.
Oh, yes, they are. And actually in quite a severe way, because other ministers lost their seats as well.
Right.
So they've lost quite a few of the senior Liberal camp. I would just say that John Howard lost his seat, Malcolm Turnbull lost his seat, and Tony Abbott has lost his seat while still sitting. So this is uncommon, but in the Liberal Party, possibly becoming more common. I think this is more about intra-party politics than anything to do the previous ones, the change of leadership. But certainly Dixon, Dutton's held it for 24 years. He won it off Labour 24 years ago, and he's been able to hold it. And his personality, sort of, and historically at least, I would say, fits with that sort of what Queensland as a state has wanted in a leader, but it just didn't fit. And I would just add here that the Libs lately haven't been particularly good on winning the women's vote. There's a bit of an ick factor, Annabelle Crabb calls it, an ick factor within the Liberal Party.
Right.
And they haven't made any effort to fix this, despite an internal review in 2022 saying you need to fix this.
Yeah, well, you talk about 2022, and that obviously is when the Teals came to prominence and kicked out some, sitting Liberal, high-profile Liberals in that election. This time around, it seems the independents haven't had a swell in vote, but they haven't really lost much either. Is that correct?
Well, I have to say I've written 2 books on independence in Australian politics, and so this is my thing. And I think when we look at the Australian system with the preferential voting system, what we know is that the independents have actually done very well, because last election, the Teals got in by winning preferences from other parties that weren't winning their seat, right? This time around, quite a few of them are winning on the primary vote for themselves.
Okay, so it's becoming more solid, more entrenched.
Yes. And I think this is a fragmentation on the right. Most of these Teals are women, affluent, from inner urban cities, seats that would normally vote Liberal.
The so-called Teal movement is made up of independent women candidates who may have once voted Liberal or Blue, but have a green tinge because of their concerns about climate change. The Teal wave swept through Liberal urban seats last election, but the model is based on a rural seat in Victoria called Indi, where independent MP Helen Haines has just won a 3rd term with an increased vote.
Well, I think it's people-powered politics. It's positive campaigning. It's a methodology that puts the people before a major party or a party boss, and it really resonates with the people of Indi, who, you're right, had traditionally been represented by the Conservative parties here. And we changed that in 2013 through engaging with people, kitchen table conversations, very grassroots political approach, one that has long been forgotten by the major parties, and it works.
Just to be clear for our New Zealand audience, you are not associated with the Teal independent movement. In fact, as you just mentioned, you predate all that. But I wonder, as a long-serving independent, an independent veteran, as it were, what do you make of the independent vote this election?
Well, Indi has literally written a book about it. It's called The Indi Way. There's no question that what happened in Indi and the methodology that we used was transferable to other places. And that's, of course, was the bedrock of what media like to call the Teal movement. Those of us who are independents prefer to call it the community independent movement, where communities get together and say, hey, we want to try and find someone who's outside of the major parties and can represent us. But in terms of the independent representation in the parliament now, we saw in the last election a big wave of independents coming through, mostly in the metropolitan seats of Sydney and Melbourne. Forming the biggest crossbench ever in Australian federal history. There's a couple of seats that are pretty tight, but it looks mostly like all of those independents have been returned as well. And across the nation, 35 community independents ran in this election, and again, some seats too close to call. but there may be more coming into the parliament this time.
Why is it the traditional Liberal national seats are falling to this independent wave?
Well, if you look at who the independents are, they're mostly women, experienced women with significant professional careers. We don't see women with significant professional careers in the Liberal Party anymore. You've only got to look in the parliament. It is mostly still men in blue suits. And traditionally in Australia, that's how the parliament looked. Well, women don't want it to look like that anymore. I think the Labor Party have listened to that. They have more women now representing the Labor Party in the federal parliament than men. Their cabinet has a higher proportion of women than men. But the Conservative parties, the Liberal national parties, have resisted this, and it shows in their policy offerings. This election period in Australia was an extraordinary menu coming from the Liberal Party, which women said no thank you to. And women were saying no thank you to nuclear power, no thank you to knocking out our working from home opportunities. I think women feel that the best chance they have, particularly if they're not associated with the Labor union movement, the best chance they have of being elected into the federal parliament with progressive views on climate, on transparency and accountability, with really clear eyes on solutions rather than mudslinging, the best chance they have is to run as an independent, and that's what we're seeing happening.
Do you think that the Liberals will finally wake up to this and they might create a challenge next time around to the independent wave?
If they don't listen to the people, then they don't deserve to be in the parliament. And if they are unable to learn the lessons of not just this election but the one before, then quite possibly we will see them disappear. You only need to look at the seats in the parliament now. If the change that we've seen happen with community independence continues, then we may well be a stronger representative group than the Liberal Party. So, if I was in the Liberal Party, which I never will be, so easy for me to say from the outside, but I would be having a very serious look at this. But, I think they did a very significant review last time, Simon, and they didn't follow through. And there's no point doing reviews and having long lists of recommendations only to say we're not going to bother with it.
So just finally, are you surprised at the way the election turned out, given that a few months ago the polls were going the other way?
I'm never surprised by what the Australian people decide to do, to be truthful. And I think what we saw was, the governing Labor Party put to the people a suite of policies that were a response to significant community concerns. I also think that Australians are watching what's happening around the world, and they don't like what they see. And anyone here who flirts with the idea of going to the extreme right or playing to the gallery of popularism will be rejected, and they have been emphatically rejected by the Australian people. And I'm really proud that that's seen my seat with an uptick in my primary vote, and I think what we've seen nationally with an extraordinary win by the Labor Party should once and for all say to the Liberals, you're on the wrong train.
So the political landscape is changing in Australia. Its traditional two-party politics is being challenged, and one of those challenges is Conrad Benjamin.
Oi, punters, do you want to know what's worse than a corporate bludger making record profits while we all struggle? I'll tell you what's worse. A corporate shill telling us that we should be happy about it.
To his surprise, he's gained a big audience, some 600,000 followers this election cycle, with his satirical social media offering called Punters Politics.
I think the main reason most Aussies might think that the everyday Aussie punter doesn't care about politics, and I think the rapid growth of my platform shows that Aussie punters do actually care. It's just about what and about the right big issues, because most of media, most of the corporate media machine will talk about these beauty pageant politics, like these little issues here. You look at the election campaign, they all hop on a bus and the media follow them around so they can get a nightly grab at the nightly news. And most Aussie punters might tune out from that and go, who really cares? But as soon as I start talking about like the biggest scam in Australian history, how we've given our gas away for free to foreign multinationals and they pay no tax, like Aussies wake up and go, oh, hang on. Are we really? Like, these are the big issues that that they seem to actually care about, because it's kind of the root cause of everything else that flows from it, the cost of living, etc.
Yeah. So let's be clear, though. I mean, so you are issues-based, but you're not politically aligned. Is that right?
That's right. That's the goal. I'm trying to do my best to introduce a new way of talking about politics, because every election the parties change. Albo just won a massive victory, but he got a similar close to amount of vote that Bill Shorten got, but he's running with different policies. So I'm going, well, let's get off this beauty pageant cheering for the prettiest girl in the room sort of thing, and let's talk about the issues, and who cares who picks them up? But whoever's going to tax these corporate bludgers, let's go for that.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's interesting analogy calling those to a beauty pageant, just by the way.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, given the choices we had, Albo's certainly the prettiest one.
Okay. Have you been surprised by the attention you get, by the uptake in your audience? Because we're talking, a younger online audience here.
Yeah, for sure. I think I did shock myself thinking that I also thought that Aussie punters, the everyday Aussie bloke, just did not care. And the blokes that see me in the street, I was just out at the surf yesterday in Newcastle, and the blokes that come up and recognise me fresh out the surf, your everyday tradie builder, it shocked me to see that they actually do care about the big issues as well.
Okay, I understand you call your audience mad punts. Is that right?
Yes, mad punts, sick punts.
All right. How did you enjoy Saturday night?
Oh, it was a good time. I was live streaming with a great independent journalist here, Michael West and Josh Shep. And with Aussie Man in WA, you might have seen him on YouTube, a few YouTubers, and we were watching it unfold. But it kind of played out a little bit like the betting markets had predicted it. So Not too many surprises. Looking back at the campaign, and you've had a whole year of it, but just the campaign in particular, you got a highlight? I'm a bit disappointed overall, to be honest. I think a lot of the work I've been doing is to push into the political consciousness this big gas scam. We're giving all our gas away for free. They're not paying tax. So in a way, a little bit disappointed. We saw the same media junket kind of play out. Oh, we're going to give you a discounts on fuel. Oh, we're going to give you a $20,000 HECS if you just re-elect us. Mate, you're in power now. Do it now. But so I feel like it's still the same political tricks being pulled. There's still the same politics. And I'm pushing for a much, much, much more substance from my politicians. Catch you in the next episode. Cheers, punts.
For now, it's 3 more years of Labor and its leader, Anthony Albanese. That means no nuclear power across the ditch, but in reality, will anything else actually change in the Aussie-Kiwi relationship? Final word to NBR correspondent Lachlan Cahoon.
I think it's business as usual, Simon. Yeah. I think that no matter which party was in had won the election, we have a very strong relationship with New Zealand, regardless of different complexions of government on either side. I can't see that it's going to make any difference for New Zealand at all. We're on track. We're mates, and we'll stay that way.
And that wraps up this episode of the NBR Podcast. Links to social media clips used are in the description. Thanks to content producer Joseph Hisayasu. Up next, rates, roads and pipes. The NBR launches a special series on our local government elections. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you then.